Hello and welcome to the Child Care Aware of Minnesota Legislative Update for action through May 3rd, 2024. Once again this week, I'm going to start with some slides to bring us up to speed since there's a lot to report. A reminder that we are in the last 2 weeks of the legislature, so things are moving quite quickly. This format will show you the bills now as they are matching up and remind you of some of the elements that are in each of the bills that have to do with early learning and childcare. So first we have the Omnibus Children and Families Bill on the House side and the Omnibus Health and Human Services Bill on the Senate side. This is where a majority of the childcare legislation resides. And as you can see, both those bills have passed their respective houses. So the next step will be for those to move on to the conference committee. And the elements listed here, we've talked about before, are in either one or the other or both bills. So everything on this screen is in both bills, just slight differences in either funding or approach. So more funding for the Child Development Associate credential, more funding for compliance and licensing, basically the Office of Child Care Ombudsperson to support family child care providers in things like compliance and licensing, and then policy that affects the ability of child care centers and family child care to have a stronger provision around immunization. Finally, a couple of final items there that you see that are policy specific. These came from the governor's bill. Changes to the new licensing system, the weighted risk licensing system, and also a lot of both bills really are focused on both funding and structure for the new Department of Children, Youth, and Families. A couple of things that are specifically in the Senate bill. So this would be a good example of something where we'll hope to see these negotiated with the House. First of all, Senator Bolden's bill that provides additional funding for early childhood mental health consultation for child care providers, and funding that would continue what has been the child care facility revitalization grants. So those are in the Senate. Hope to see them in the House during the negotiations. Finally, the Department of Inspector General, meaning licensing bill, those are incorporated into the Senate HHS and the House HHS bill. The House Health bill specifically is scheduled for this coming week in Ways and Means. So eventually that will be heard on the floor and then those pieces will get lined up. When we move on to education, so the E12 bills, as you can see, the House bill has passed the floor. The Senate bill has passed the Finance Committee, but is still waiting for a floor vote. Several elements, again, in these bills that deal with pre-K in the context of the E12 system. So the first was the bill that merges the former School Readiness Plus program with the current voluntary pre-K program, makes some additional changes. That actually got heard separately as a bill on the floor, but is now in the Senate E12 bill and most likely would get negotiated in that process. Voluntary pre-K reserves, those were passed in both bills. That's the governor's recommendation to utilize unspent reserve money for more seats on VPK. And then finally, additional funding, not additional funding, but the ability of Head Start programs to use more of their funding to do administrative support. Specifically in the Senate E12 bill, there is also this provision around preschool care being offered by before and after school programs as long as the children are enrolled in the district, most likely children that are in a VPK or pre-K program already at the school. Then we move on to higher ed. So these two bills, the House did hear initially hear the higher ed bill, but it was what's called laid on the table. So most likely it will be brought back up probably to agree with the Senate bill. And then the Senate Finance Committee, that's also awaiting a floor vote. Just one fairly large, but nonetheless, one provision in there that has to do with childcare or early learning. And this is funding in both bills to focus on bringing more Head Start programs onto college campuses and $500,000 in one-time funding in both bills for that. In workforce development, we also have one provision, or two provisions rather. First of all, those bills, the House has passed the bill and the Senate has also passed the bill, as you can see here. I'm going to read my own notes. The two provisions that are in the House side, there's a provision to give additional money to Women Venture for their work with childcare. And in the Senate side, there's funding to start a childcare business management solutions vendor contract. Love that one. That would flow through the Department of Employment and Economic Development. So basically a shared services model. So those again go to conference committee. Here's a very good example of some negotiation that will have to go on with one element in the House, one element in the Senate. And finally, the agriculture bill. Again, not something we generally track, but there is some funding this year in both bills, slightly different amounts, as you can see here. So the House is waiting for a floor vote, has passed Ways and Means. The Senate has passed the Finance Committee, also waiting for a floor vote. But both of the provisions in this bill deal with more money for farm to child care facilities. So it goes beyond the farm to school. It incorporates more of childcare and early learning settings. Differences have to do primarily with the funding and how the bill is written. So once again, recap, conference committees will be formed, we hope, to work out the differences in these last 2 weeks. So in the case, for instance, of children and families and health and human services in the Senate, that having passed both floors now, that work could start soon. Others have to wait, of course, until one or the other or both bills are heard on the floor. But this will become the main focus of the next week, especially, and drifting probably into the second week. Then those reports will come back from conference committees and they will come back to the House and the Senate for either an up or a down vote. And they have to do all this by May 20th. Then those bills, this is not on the list here, but will go to the governor, who will either sign or veto it. And that will be the end of the legislative session. Just a reminder that June 30th of this year is the end of the fiscal year, but the budget has already been set. So even if nothing changes this year, that budget will stand. So hopefully we will have more to report by next week, particularly on conference committees. So stay tuned. Be sure to check our website and look at our bill tracker if you want to look at any of these bills or the bills that were incorporated into them. That is on the bill tracker. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us.